It's all about humanity. About humanity. It's all about humanity. About humanity. It's all about humanity. It's all about humanity. About humanity. It's all about humanity. About humanity. It's all about humanity. It's all about humanity. About It's all about humanity. About It's all about humanity. It's all about humanity. About About It's all about humanity. About About It's all about humanity.
Good evening, model citizens. Welcome to Humanity Junction. My name is Heath, and tonight is Modeling Monday. We've got an interview with you, for us tonight with Al Daumann. I hope I just said his last name right. We're going to talk a little bit about operations and what we can do to possibly think outside of the box a little bit to make it interesting for everybody. But before we do, let's take a second to jump in and see who's joining us tonight, and then I got a couple of a little bit of announcements, and then we'll check in with Al in a little bit. First on the list tonight is Chicago South Shore and South Dokie. Welcome. We've got Tim CP368 Productions in the house. Eric Dad Cooks is here. We've got David Atkins joining us from up in Canada West. We've got Dragon Lover 68, Dwight Curley in the house, Robert Johnson, Mr. Flying Crow. We've got Jerry Setz joining us from just a little bit south of me. John 2618 is here as well. We've got AK Crazy Russian DCC Train in the house. Ian from Lehigh River Subdivision is here. Leslie Gilpin joining us. Leslie, I'm curious how the new house situation is working out. Lauren Hurwitz, my old man, as he posted in the chat. Lynn McCurdy's still awake. At least, hopefully, he's still awake, unless he fell asleep since his last post. We've got Mark M&M Rails. Mark posted to my video like seconds after I posted it up. So, I don't know if Mark's stalking me or what's going on. But Alan from Mason-Dixon Railroad is here. Nathan DeLay is in the house. Ron from New Haven Rails is here. Norm Miller. Norm, I hope you can entertain your daughter a little bit tonight. She's got a lot of energy. Robert Darby's in the house. Roy Eltham is here. Shays N Scale. Jason the Train Freak. And Rob, Why Are You Naked 4 is here. Rob, good to see you. Haven't seen you in a good while. Let's see. Colin Wykes is also here. Este Panda Projects, who is Adam Estep, who we, the Caboose in the Woods. We interviewed him for that, and that was really cool. Yeah, it looks like I got most people. If I missed you, I apologize. But let me get to the announcements. Happy July 5th. Today is the observed Independence Day holiday for a lot of us here in the U.S. That said, I didn't take a vacation this weekend, but I am taking a vacation next weekend. If you're interested in taking over my Friday live stream for the day, 11:30 to 1 p.m. Eastern, send me an email and I'll let you know. I'll hit you back up, just so that if you want to do it, I'll give you a shout out. If nobody's up for it, just know that I'm going to be skipping Friday because the girlfriend and I will be out of town. Sidetrack Sunday schedule all mixed up this month. Last night was my night, or was John's night, but I did it. Next week, which would normally be my night, John is doing it. Then it's going to be Jason, and then instead of Ray, it's going to be Rick. So this month it was me yesterday. Me yesterday, John from Schuylkill River Valley next week, Jason the Train Freak the week after that, and then Rick Bailey is going to be week 4. Also, last night I mentioned weight loss contest. I got one email. I'm not sure if that person was sending it as a joke or not, but I think it'd be fun for us to do sort of a model railroad get-together weight loss contest thing. We'll figure it out, who wants to do it. We'll figure out what, the prize will be or whatever. Email me if you want. I'm like talking so fast tonight. My dad's texting me saying, "Where are you going?" We're just going upstate. What we do is, because we have the dog and stuff, we just get in the car. We find a place within 2 hours, kind of an Airbnb place, and we just go and hang out and chill. So, as Jason the Train Freak says, Jason is the only normal STS guy this month. I don't, normal. We'll see. We've got DES Media Productions joining us. MSI Hunter 5 is here. Grandpa Rails checking in. Awesome. Hey, we got a good crowd considering it's a holiday day. Getting rid of your train stuff is not considered weight loss. I do get how, in your case, Lynn, it could be perceived that way, but the weight loss contest that I'm talking about is more of a personal weight loss journey. And as Dad cooks, he's always losing weight, but then he finds it again, which, normal. Yeah. Jason is nothing but boring. I'll tell you, if we're lucky, maybe he'll do some lick and stick decals or something along those lines. But let me get on with, so tonight, what's happening tonight? Let's start with what's happening tomorrow. We'll get back to tonight in 1 second. But tomorrow starts the NMRA 2021 National Convention. It's being hosted by the Pacific Coast region out of Santa Clara, California. They're calling it Rails by the Bay. $49 for about 80 hours of content. There's going to be a lot of different stuff going on. There's a lot of different breakout rooms, a lot of different conversations. The people that I've been interviewing for the last 5 weeks are all people that I've met through the preparation for this NMRA convention. So if you've liked the content from the past couple of weeks of Modeling Monday, these are some of the people that are going to be doing more formal, more structured clinics at the NMRA. If you haven't liked the content over the last 5 weeks, there are other people that will also be doing clinics as well. And they are going to have a room for YouTube model railroaders. It's a breakout room where we'll be able to come in and just, say hello and chat. So I'm going to host that room on Tuesdays during the lunch break and on Thursdays during the lunch break. So if you do join, please come and come hang out and say hello. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce tonight's guest. He is going to be one of the clinicians for the NMRA, but tonight we're going to talk a little bit about operations and just making operations fun for everybody. So, Al, welcome to the show.
depending on where you are. Unless we've got somebody who's really on the other side of the globe, then good morning to you, I guess.
I have not seen our Australia friends, but we do every once in a while get some people. We got a couple people from the UK, got people from all across the US, and what was I gonna say? Oh, and people from Canada. I was like totally blanked out on that. Yeah, so think of the airfare everyone can save by joining the convention virtually.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they do that, how much of that they do going forward, whether they allow all these virtual only events. You wonder going forward how that's going to be, if they're going to have a mix or not. I suspect not, but who knows?
Would like to see I totally blanked on what they call them. Events where they do a little bit of both. You know,
Hmm.
where it's a live show, and if you can afford to go, great. But if you can't afford to go, you can still, join in other ways. And I think that that's kind of important just in the way society is these days. I think it's great to make things more inclusive, which I think the virtual side of thing helps bring people. But anyway, we could go on about this forever, forever. Yeah, Robert Darby's saying a combination of both, and I do think that. But so Al, you're a model railroader, and you've been in the hobby for a little bit. How'd you get started in this wacky and crazy hobby that we all love?
So, like most folks, started in the hobby as a kid, and I remember my dad putting together a Lionel set on some Homosote. When we lived in an apartment, we moved to a house that had a basement and had a prefab HO uh, HO setup. And if we have time later, I'll go back to an interesting story about that particular setup. But then didn't got kind of got more into slot cars and other things and got busy and really kind of dropped out of the hobby. Though in the back of my mind there was always this, if I ever get a space, I'd like to do a train layout. And then my wife actually bought me a small HO train set to put around the Christmas tree, and she rused that day to today. But yeah, that was part of getting back in the hobby. Local club had a swap meet. Talked to them there, and went to an open house and won the raffle prize. So now I had an engine and all of that. So
Yeah.
mostly it was a couple of happenstance occurrences, and then got involved with a club. And that was really an introduction to real model railroading, as opposed to just playing with trains, which is okay too, but just playing with trains. So that was it. And then just gradually morphed into more of the operations part of it. Started building a home layout in the 2005 2006 timeframe, and still stayed involved with the club, but then became part of a round robin operations group in Southern California. And
Before we
then
get too much into that,
sure.
let's just go back a little bit. I think I'm curious to sort of pull the audience a little bit. You mentioned that you started with O scale and then got back into it because of a train around the Christmas tree, and that's exactly how I got into it as well. Was O scale and then a train around the Christmas tree in 2019 actually started kind of all this. So I'm curious in the chat if people have a similar thing. Like, was it O scale and then Christmas tree, or uh, was it some other stuff as well? But get back in. So you just started talking about this round robin that you do. So people, the current layout that you have, did you build it for operations for people to come over, and that's what got you into it, or were you going to other people's layouts and operating on them kind of, and then like how,
Yeah, I'd
because
say
also
it
like when
started. Go ahead.
we talked about a Christmas tree, right, which is a circle of track, and I think most people probably start with a circle of track.
Hmm.
How do you get from a circle of track to um to model railroad operations? It just, at least for me, it seems like a really huge gap. And I've titled this, operations is fun. It's like, to me, that gap seems really wide. So part of what I want to talk about is how we get from that loop of track to, having operations be fun.
Well, yeah, I think in my case it was like you said, it was a circle around the tree, or this prefab thing I had in my basement was the same thing. It was basically a loop of track. Getting involved at the club, what I saw was people would bring their train to the club, set it up, and run it. So in that sense, it wasn't that different than slot cars, where you brought your car or cars, you go to this thing, you run it around, and you're sort of interacting with other people, but you have your own slot, so you're really not necessarily doing that. And then in our case, there is a home layout, very large home layout in the Santa Barbara, Montecito area. And this person, Gary Siegel, he's been in Model Railroader. He does an L&N Eastern Kentucky division. And he's been kind of the Pied Piper of operations in Southern California. I think Gary's in his early 80s now. But a couple people from the club got invited. My friend from the club went. It was midnight and they had to drag him out of there. He was bitten by it that hard. And then he started introducing operations at the club. And again, we can get into how do you introduce operations to people who don't know what it is, as opposed to, like you said, this huge gap. There are baby steps along the way that you could potentially take. So I think
How
that's,
long ago was this that you started getting into operations?
I'd say probably the late 90s was
Okay.
probably the first time. Gary's layout was in Model Railroader in April of 96. And then we did operations at the club, and then occasionally this Gary Siegel's layout. And then I started getting invited to a couple other local layouts. And at that point, I think back to your other question, I initially designed my 10 by 12 bedroom layout to be both a running layout and an operations layout. And as it turns out, I almost never run on it. I only operate on it. And someone who had a home layout and he said he never ran on it, I was just completely flabbergasted. What do you mean? And now I understand completely.
That's what I feel like. I cannot imagine having a layout with at least balloon loops at the end, like minimally. But like, to not be able to just continuous run, it's just it's a hard concept for me. And I know, as we were talking earlier, you said your current layout is just point to point. What is your current layout? What do you model? What like, what era and what area is it?
Well, actually, just brief rewind. My layout is loop to loop, but
Oh, okay.
I can also run it as point to point. And something we can get back to is the loops. I actually use them as branch lines. So I rarely run them as loops, but the fact that there's a connection to go to them, I actually stage a couple of trains and the loop becomes a branch line during operations. And if I ever have relatives over and whatever, I got to pull the trains out of the branch and then I can go and run it loop to loop. So that was by happenstance. But yeah, the current layout is in a 10 by 12 bedroom. It's got a 3 foot by 4.5 foot closet that I expanded into. And then the layout room is kind of, it's adjacent to the laundry room. So there's what I like to say is I have joint authority in a 6 by 6 part of the laundry room that is kind of a staging area and the dispatching area. So
you're expanding out of your room a little bit,
right. And those folks who know me know I've been talking for probably at least 10 years about making the room bigger, and that still hasn't happened. So I'm still looking for that Walther's 933-1234 room expander that you can just buy and then implement it.
And one of the things I think I do want to get to in a little bit, but just the conversation about how you can do operations on smaller layouts. as well as other stuff. But you haven't mentioned what area of the country are you modeling? I don't know if you can,
Sorry.
if you
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
screen share that one
Oh,
page
okay.
you have,
Sure.
maybe.
Let me
Yeah, that
see
might
if
be a
I
good
can
time.
do that here. Okay. Share your stream. Is that what I want to? Well, no, I want to
Yes.
share the screen. Never mind. All right. Let's see here.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know if you did drop down for a second and I brought you back up. So
Okay.
I've been having a
So
little bit of
is
internet
that screen
issues.
share working?
Yes, it is. We can see that.
Okay.
We see
And
the
so
first page of your presentation.
right. Okay. So let's skip ahead here. Well, if you want to just look at the part of the country, so here, this is California. I'm in Southern California here in Simi Valley. The area that I'm modeling is actually in Northern California. This is the town of Eureka, which is along the coast. And there's a
Can you
road.
click the presentation button to make it a little bigger?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Am I gonna? Let's see.
There we go.
Still
Perfect.
there? Okay.
That's great.
All right. So rewind here. This is Eureka, California, along the coast. And the reason I'm modeling this area very quickly is my mother-in-law used to live up there. My wife graduated from high school up there. I visited there, and it's just I really like the geography of the area. So this is a road, California Highway 299, that goes from Eureka to Redding, California. That's kind of this junction here. And then it continues up to Alturas. This is where the SP Modoc line is. So you can kind of see that up here. And so the modeled area of the layout room is here from Redding to Bieber. This is staging. This whole 150 miles here is staging. And then we also go down to Sacramento, California here. And again, it just so happens this area, Redding in the middle, is about 150 miles from each of these three spokes, if you want. And that actually turned out to be serendipitous in terms of being able to model, because I'm in the steam era, 1947, and it's a little long, but that's about a subdivision in the steam era. So
Your Steam era, so do you run any diesels at all, or is it you're completely before the diesel world?
so yeah, I don't know if this slide in here, this is kind of what I went over previously in terms of the layout space. And then this is the mainline length, double deck, and the minimum radius, Freelance, Northern California. And those are the areas that I modeled. So as I indicate here, it's all steam. There are switchers from GN and WP that are tolerated on the layout. They're on for a short period of time. We've actually made another modification since the slide was created on that. But I'm not going to read through all of this. This is just, car card and waybill, real clock, timetable and train order, 4-hour session, 3-person crew, bridge traffic, copper mining, lumber, livestock, and then we do passenger operations. So, as I have a couple different clinics out there about the kind of operations you can do on a small layout. So just
Let me
because you
just
don't
get
have a
to a
lot of,
couple of these questions, Al. A couple of people
sure.
are coming. Lauren Hurwitz says, for the novice in me, what's the difference between running and operations? And I think we're talking more about for running, more like just that, rail
Right,
fanning.
running, you could argue, is just moving your train from where you want to move it to where you want it to go without necessarily any prototypical or train control sense. Clubs will do running where someone brings down their super chief and someone may bring down a modern stack train, and they're just running, watching their train run, go from one end of the layout to another. If there's enough trains on the layout, there may be a dispatcher to make sure the trains move efficiently and don't crash into each other. Whereas when you're operating, there is some kind of a scheme. There's a set of assumptions, and these can be very simplistic to very, very complex. What I've got listed on the screen here is some hint of what I'm trying to model. And then, typically when you're at an operating session, you're at a club or someone's home where you're running their equipment It's not about you running your train. It's you're taking a job on that layout. You could be a road crew, you could be a yard master, you could be a dispatcher, etc. So it's the operating session. You're almost like a reenactor, if you want,
Oh, there you
particularly if
go.
it's
That's a
set
good,
in the
yeah.
past.
That's a good word for it. Lynn McCurdy says, Al, I assume you visit the Simi Valley swap meets and the Santa Susana Pacific Model Railroad Club in the depot?
Yes, that's the club that I joined in 1994, and I've been
There
the
you go.
president of the club. I've been the train master. I've been the recording secretary. So yeah, I've hosted a lot of roles, and that's really the organization that got me into model railroading. From just being a train aficionado to going in. And at that time, the club was building a new layout. They had a small layout and they were
Mm.
building a new one. So it was really good for me learning about construction techniques, wiring, etc., from people who had built multiple layouts. The timing couldn't have been better for me. I'm very fortunate in that.
Grandpa Rail says, Al is very close to me. I live in Oxnard, California. And Lynn McCurdy says, Grandpa Rail's almost as close to me in Palmdale. So it looks like
Well, we have every first Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. is our board meeting, and that's typically when new members just come in and introduce themselves. So if you want to stop by, or their club's open every Saturday and Sunday from 1 to 4, and someone can show you around, and if you're so interested, give you a membership application. So a little plug for that.
there you go. Al, do you remember the High Desert Modular Model Railroad Club setting up in the depot?
I believe so. I know on some of our swap meets we brought some folks. We've had modular clubs set up, and there's about a 30 by 30-ish meeting room, and we've probably had over the years a half a dozen different modular clubs in there, mostly HO and N scale. I'm trying to remember if we had anything from any of the other scales, but it's probably been a while. But I'm sure I know of someone who belonged to a club in the Palmdale, Lancaster area. I'm trying to remember if he was part of that group or not.
Sorry, someone's asking questions that I try to answer and talk at the same time. So where I'd like to go is you gave a great example of a baseball coach winning at all costs and it just not being fun. So I'm a new modeler, never done operations. Like, what do I do? Like, how do I go to a club? Do I do it at home? Like what are some kind of how do I get into it so that it's fun and it's not this kind of like I mean, it seems like you almost have to be a rocket scientist to be into operations.
Definitely not. There's a lot of there's more. Again, there are some sessions that are very simple. There are some sessions that are more complex. And in terms of just on a personal level, I joined. This is pre the internet being. I think it was around in '94, but probably just if you were on a government project or something like that. But yeah, I mean the classic things would have been go to your local hobby shop. Sometimes there's flyers for open houses, there's swap meets, etc. So a club tends to be a very good way to join, or if you happen to know someone, and if you don't, the NMRA's OPSIG, my OPSIG shirt here. So
There
the
you go.
Operations Special Interest Group, I think it's www.opsig.org. And if you look there, you can join. I think it's $7 a year if you do an online subscription, and they have a directory. And what you can do is sometimes I was traveling to New Mexico. I went to the directory. I saw a couple people put their names in that you can contact them. I contacted a guy. I said, "Hey, you're running an op session? Hey, I happen to be there in early May. There was an op session. Here's a bunch of 8, 10 guys I'd never met before. They invited me to the op session, And so that was one way through the NMRA, through the OPSIG, where you can meet people. But it's probably a lot of other things. How do you get into skydiving? How do you get into whatever? It's now you look online, see if there's a groups IO, see what's on Facebook. There is also the OPSIG editor has an operations, like a message, it's an email service, and you can decide to post your op session, and then everybody who's on that group gets an email. Here's an op session in Indianapolis. Well, it's a little far from me, but you can do that. So there's lots of ways to hear about them.
Can
But
you show
usually,
your session pace continuum thing and get a little bit into
sure,
how is a beginner versus an advanced person kind of fits into that? And
sure.
the thing where I was talking about just I was hoping you were going to take the lead and go into more detail, but we were talking about how when a baseball coach
Mhm.
pressures little kids into winning a game,
Okay.
and the little kids at the end of the season have a trophy on the shelf that they've won the game, and that's really exciting, right? They won, but none of the kids really enjoyed it, so the next season half those kids don't even bother coming back. uh,
Right. We had talked about that. Was the experience my son had. Was played in t-ball, then made the all-stars, played the next year. That team won the championship. Only the coach's kids got to pitch. They were the other kids were stuck out in the outfield. They won the championship. My son said, I never want to play baseball again. So if you go to an operating session and the newbie that shows up decides they don't want to do that ever again, you fail, in terms of trying to make it fun. Now, in some cases, it just may not be someone's cup of tea. We
right,
had a guy
right.
at our club that he attended one of the operating sessions, and he's like, I don't like somebody telling me when I can move my train or not. I just want to go and run. And that was what he liked. So that wasn't for him. But yeah, this is one of the, if I assume what I'm showing on the screen
Yes, yeah.
is visible. So this is one of my slides from my clinic, and I've shown this before. This is kind of the operating session pace continuum. And the overall subject of this clinic is maximizing operations on small layouts. So this is Houston. Do we have a problem? Is there a reason to make it more, uh, to make the session, to maximize it? And so what I say on here is setting the overall pace is an important factor. So you'll go to some layouts, and if it's too simple, too basic for some folks, I've heard people say, gee, I was bored. One guy told me he was a yard master and he was so bored that when he was done, he put all the cars in numerical order, then he put them in alphabetical order. So if someone has enough time to do that, you probably aren't challenging people enough. On the other end of the continuum, you don't want somebody to be frazzled. You're not getting paid for this. This isn't work. So the sweet spot in an operating session is somewhere between relaxed, interested, and challenged. And some of the operations weekends, or they will describe a job, this is a relaxed job. You're on a branch line by yourself. You're a mine run engineer. You're picking up the 7 or 8 tipples. If you get them all, if you get all the cars pulled, that's great. If you don't get all of them pulled, it doesn't really matter. Another job might be a small yard. You might be on a passenger train that other trains are waiting for. And then other folks that are really interested in being more challenged on many layouts, the dispatcher that's in control of all the trains on the main line is a pretty busy job. If there's a big yard that uh, sets the arrivals, sets the departures, and handles the arrivals of a lot of important trains, that's an important job. So that's probably not a good job for a newbie, but you want them to be exposed to that. It's like I said, no one enjoys being bored, few people being frazzled. So you really want to determine the pace range of the jobs. On a really big layout, you can have jobs on the entire continuum. But a smaller layout, you're not going to have as many different jobs. But in talking about the clinic, in my case, I do like to be, challenged to interested. So, my clinic is more about this, but that is part of um, the pretty wide spectrum that you have in operations.
So if I showed up for an op session at somebody's layout, though, like, are they going to have some sort of task for me to do if I walk? Like, I know there's different that you talked about, like you have a rotating group where you kind of know who everybody is, but then there's these ops weekends where anybody kind of shows up and you don't know who's going to be there.
Right, and there's difference as a newbie, for instance, if you went to the local hobby store and there was a flyer for an operating session at the Main Street Model Railroad Club, everybody's invited. You show up. Hey, Heath, have you ever done operations before? No. Okay, well, tell you what, we'll pair you up with Joe. Joe's a pretty good mentor. He's going to run a train around the layout. And what they might do is create a two-person crew where you would be the engineer, where in a certain sense, you're just, okay, advance the train 50 feet down the track and then stop at the end. A conductor will be basically telling you what to do, kind of like being when you're learning how to drive a car. And you wouldn't have to make any of those decisions, but you'd learn about the layout. You'd learn about, maybe you've never used that control system before. And then later in the session, depending on the layout, maybe you'd get to go out on your own. Maybe it would be the next time you showed up, but hopefully someone would be there. If it's a small enough home layout, then maybe you're going to have a job by yourself, but the layout owner is going to be available to make time to instruct you. So, and some people pick it up quickly. Some people, it takes them longer. Some people never pick it up. That's kind of how it works out. But hopefully someone is going to be there to encourage you so that you have a good time and you come back.
And so talking about sort of the kind of beginner to more advanced roles, you showed a slide earlier that kind of showed various different, I think that it was like a slide with all the car cards on it, the passenger, the mail stuff and whatever. And I just thought that was really interesting. Nathan DeLay earlier was asking about kind of what are the different kind of operations things that you can do, like, a coal drag, a passenger train, like, and what did those kind of things look like?
Yeah, so before I go to the slide, so I would say the yeah, I guess in terms of the in terms of the different jobs, uh, again, there's a complexity, there is a pace that you um, that, again, someone new to the layout. You mentioned on if it's a home layout and everybody else is experienced and has run on that layout, and one person's the newbie, then yeah, usually someone will put them take them under their wing. If in one of these operations weekends where you sign up, like the one in the Phoenix area, Desert Ops, is an open invite, first come first serve.
Mm.
You show up, if you've never been there before, you tell someone that, and they would probably assign you to a more basic job. And I think that's part of it. But what I was showing, I guess I can show this now. Let me go to full
I
screen.
can bring it up.
Yeah, so
There you go.
this is somewhat unique, maybe, or to my layout. But what the point of this slide from my clinic was, on a small layout, um, the gist of what I'm saying is you have to kind of enhance the operations because the layout's small. You're not like the La Mesa Club in San Diego. You're not running 100-car train across a 3,000-foot main line. That might be the biggest operating model railroad in the country. So just being there and seeing that great scenery and those large trains is probably enough to generate your interest. But we also asked about what kind of job. A passenger train often is a pretty basic job. And depending on the layout, you may just go from one end of the layout and they'll tell you just take the train across the layout, and when you get to the end, you're done. And from that sense, it's
And don't
pretty.
run into anything along the way.
Yeah, don't run into anything. And depending on what kind of train control that has, you might be on a radio talking to a dispatcher. You may have a schedule that's really going to basically tell you don't leave before this time, but every other train has to get out of your way. So other than leaving early or not getting tremendously late, those are the only things you have to worry about. Um, and then as you go on, if you're doing more of a freight type job, then you're going to do things with different. And again, one of the systems is car cards, where you have something that models some of the aspect of the paperwork that was involved in the prototype. Other folks have taken this and put it on a computer, where you get a computer generated list, which is more of what the modern folks do. But these are all things that you can do. But more often than not, as a crew on a freight train, you're going to leave and you're going to have maybe some cars that stay on your train during its entire journey. You're going to have some cars that you're either going to have to set out in a yard that you pass through, and then you may pick up some cars, a block of cars in that yard. And then some other trains are what they would call a local or a peddler. And then you may actually be going into specific industries. You'll go into a spur track, and there may be one or more cars that you have to, again, you have to pull those cars from the industry and replace a car, or sometimes you'll just pull a car from one industry. So again, this is kind of the reenactor. You're doing the job of what a passenger train crew would do, or what a local or a peddler job would do, etc. And you'll see this wide range of focus, from someone modeling a huge area where it's big mainline trains and it's about how many trains can transit across that railroad with a dispatcher, and others that are modeling a harbor or an industrial area. And the whole thing is in something that they call yard limits, where you have to move slow enough that you basically expect there to be something blocking you, and you have to go slow enough that your responsibility that you don't run into it. No one has to clear things from you.
How
So
do you kind of come up with all this stuff? I mean, you model a very specific era, which had a certain method of operations for that era in that area. And then there's, it's kind of, you can kind of come up with anything to some extent, but how do you narrow it down?
so one of the another good segue to a related topic here. So you could, one other way you can classify maybe different model railroads, et cetera, is, and again, it's sort of a spectrum or a continuum. The brief answer to your question is knowing what the real railroad or railroads did in a particular time period in a particular part of the country. So more often than not, you're going to start with something that really exists or existed. So on one end of the spectrum, you have these very strict following a prototype type railroad. You're modeling the Santa Fe going from, the Santa Fe going through New Mexico, or the New York Central around New York City, the Pennsylvania Railroad around the Horseshoe Curve, et cetera. And you're modeling as usually you're going to pick a specific year, and you'll get the right mix of cars. Is it steam, you're asking, or did it have diesels? Is it a mix? And there's something about that time period, that geography, and often you'll talk to people, probably the majority of them will say, well, when I was a kid, I lived in so and so, or I went to college in this town and I saw certain trains going by. The other extreme is a complete freelance, where you're not modeling a real place, you're not modeling a real railroad. And usually the people that model that don't want to be tied down or restricted by what happened. They want to just, their railroad goes from, from city to mountain to valley, and that doesn't tell you what city, what mountain. Their railroad, they'll make up a name, the East West Railroad, and they'll model that. And then in between, the two in between is a someone will model a real railroad in a place that it didn't go but could have. It's a really nice layout in the Bay Area that models what if the Santa Fe went up into Northern California,
Oh, cool.
or or there was a certain plan. What if that happened? The other end is you model a real place where a railroad could have gone but didn't. And that's kind of what I've chosen. So for me, I wanted a real place. I'm enough of a geography buff and a history buff. I wanted a real place in a real time, but I didn't want to get into the restrictions of, well, 1947, the Southern Pacific only had these specific kind of engines. I wanted a little bit more flexibility. So sometimes there's a term that's getting a little bit of traction called proto-freelancing, or
Yeah, I
being
like that.
proto-credible. You're
Right.
following the types of rules. You're not going to have a double stack train in 1947. You're not going to have a train of stock cars if you're modeling something in the current era. But in between that, you kind of pick and choose. So
Yeah, I
in
love that term, proto-lance. Just that idea of like, I want the grass to look somewhat real. I want the buildings to look somewhat real. I want things to have some sense of reality, but it's a fictitious kind of place. And this leads a little bit, I'm going to paraphrase two questions that we got a little bit earlier. Um, if I'm a dispatcher or an engineer in real life, can I come to someone's model railroad and like be a dispatcher or an engineer or whatever? And then along those same lines is time. Like if I'm operating on your railroad, if it takes an hour to do something, is it an hour of actual time, or how does that work?
Okay, so both are good, good points or good questions. And yes, there are a number of folks who during the day they run the 12-inch to the foot scale real railroads, as an engineer, as a dispatcher, in some kind of a management role. And then, kind of like the busman's holiday, and in the evening, they go ahead and shrink the size of the trains they're working on, and either they will do a different job that they do during the day, or some of them will do the same job. And you almost have to talk. When I've asked them, some of them just like the fact that now they're the boss of the railroad versus during the day, maybe they're not. And they like that aspect. I would always, why do we do it this way? On my railroad, we do this or we do that. And they just really enjoy that. And
Yeah.
they can't get enough of it. So
Well, and I guess also like if I'm a modern day engineer in 2021 and I'm operating on your railroad from 1947,
47, right.
47, then there probably are some differences in kind of operations.
Sure. Over time, from the 1850s or so on till today, the railroad has evolved. Most of the prototype railroads back in the 40s, 50s had a rule book that yay thick here, and most people have said, unfortunately, those rules are written in blood. There was an accident, there was some problem, and they instituted a new rule as a corrective action.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's something, there's airline pilots who like to fly, vintage airplanes and things like that. So it must be that type of appeal in terms of that, or that's why they're a real railroader today, because they had a train layout, or they remember seeing trains in the 60s, so they want to they can't really run the trains from the 60s anymore in real life, other than at a museum or a tourist railroad, and they want to go back to that. They want to go back to that time. And you had a second question, and I don't know.
Yes, essentially it's the fast clock question. I mean, and we can relate this a little bit to, you said like certain times of day are easier to run? Like at night, it's going to be easier to run than during the day. But how to, like, if I have a schedule and the train leaves at 8 o'clock, and then the next thing happens at 9 o'clock, I'm not going to sit there for, well, do you sit there for an hour? I guess is the
Well,
question,
again,
or do you,
part of
like,
that,
how do
right,
you?
right. Part of that depends on, what is it that you're modeling, and what are the expectations going to that train layout. Most home layouts, they're probably not going to purposely have you sit there for an hour, though in the prototype that is very, that is very prototypical. If you're on some kind of a low priority train, you may be stuck in a siding for not only an hour but for hours. But yeah, in terms of the fast clock, there's several camps, if you want, in model railroading.
Will you
For
explain
both,
what a fast clock is, just
sure.
because some
So
people might
so
not
so the
know?
so
Yeah.
the simpler thing is a real-time clock. So whatever time it is on your watch is the time it is on the railroad. And the positives from that is very simplistic. Um, the downside is you can't stop it. So if in the middle of the session you break for lunch or break for dinner,
Mm.
your watch is going to be off, and that. So from one end being the time on your watch or your phone is the time. The other would just be a one-to-one clock, which is what I do on my railroad. So if it takes 10 minutes to go from point A to point B, it really takes 10 minutes on the clock. Now, some folks want to model, particularly the folks who model a prototype railroad, they want to run the real trains that ran between San Francisco and Sacramento, or New York and Washington D.C., and they want to get that flavor of it. And in order to get enough trains running, they will go with this fast clock. And in today's era, most of the time it's 3-to-1 or 4-to-1. And the advantage of that is most operating sessions, I would say, are between 3 hours and 4 hours. Some of the folks, as all of us get older, sometimes a 4 hour session's a bit much. So the 3 hour session can typically be accomplished in an evening. And if you ran with a 4-to-1 clock, then then it runs 4 times faster. So in 15 minutes of real time, an hour would transpire, and there's a special clock on the railroad, or there's an app you can get on your phone that actually runs faster. So the advantage is in a 3 hour real time session with a 4-to-1 clock, you would run a half day. You could run from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then the next session, you would run from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So you get all the trains that ran on that railroad in 24 hours. You just wouldn't get it in one session. And
Do you
then
have an
the only
example
other,
of the different sessions that you run?
yeah, I mean, there definitely could be the flavor of, again, if you went, you know,
I mean, like
mid,
time wise, sort of thing. Like
yeah,
when
I
you,
mean, if you had a session that was that included, let's say if you did, let's say 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., you would get both the morning and the evening commuter rush, plus you get midday service. If there was anything commuting, you would get passenger trains. Whereas the 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., you might get the tail end of some of that passenger service, but in the middle of the night, you're not going to see typically as many passenger trains. Where I am in Southern California, we have a local commuter Metrolink that runs from downtown LA out to the west. Well, it runs in several different spokes, but by me, it runs to Ventura, California, and it's probably 18, 20 trains a day. Not back east busy, but still pretty busy. So the freight trains typically run at night. I'm close enough to the tracks where I can hear, and the whistle of a diesel of a freight engine is typically different. Once 9 p.m. rolls around, you can start hearing the freight trains, just so they can make better time. The same way some big truckers, they're not going to go through New York City or Los Angeles, during rush hour if they can avoid it. They're going to try to avoid those cities.
So Ian from Lehigh River Subdivision says, so operations isn't something you whip together in an hour, which kind of leads me to
Well,
how do you come up with the schedules and how do you like?
so I think that's a good question, and it definitely can seem like it's intimidating, and that's
Yeah.
clearly not what you want it to be. And I think, like most things, there's a crawl before you walk, walk before you run aspect of things. So I've actually got a neighbor that has a gorgeous garden railroad, and he normally just runs, and it's cool to run outside through this big, landscape garden, but he's just starting to get into operations. So one thing you could do is everybody is running their train, but maybe one train is on a schedule. This is one of the things I suggest. So there's one passenger train, and everybody gets the schedule, and you have to get out of its way because it's going to be the priority. So that on a train level, that's how you're introducing operations. The flip side is on, I talked about earlier about, the jobs where you're a freight train engineer or a crew, and you're setting out or picking up blocks of cars at a yard, or you're working in industry. There's a lot of potential paperwork and computer systems, but in the beginning, just swap out like cars. Your train has 3 boxcars, 2 hoppers, and a gondola. You go to a certain industry area and you swap out the 3 boxcars you had with 3 boxcars that are already there, the 2 hoppers that are already there, and the one gondola. And that's kind of a way that you can get that concept of the train now has a purpose. And the hopper the one you're picking up may be loaded, and you may be bringing out an empty one, so you're getting a concept of what you're doing. Tank cars, it's kind of hard to tell if it's loaded or not,
So
but
it sounds to me a little bit like you're talking about more of like a car card style puzzle layout as opposed to a time schedule, whole layout sort of thing. I guess
yeah, I mean, those are not mutually exclusive, but I did
okay.
mention before, there's some very large home layouts or club layouts where the trains are really long. There's long distances between towns. Modeling, living in the West, there tends to be a lot of single track. Typically
Mm.
you're going to go 8 or 9 miles of single track before you'll come across a siding where you can, meet or pass another train, all the way down to modeling, a car ferry system in Chicago or New York, or an industrial area, or a big plant, a steel mill, a paper mill, where maybe you never even get out onto the main line. All you're doing is, the railroad at night has dropped off a cut of cars, and now you have to bring these chemicals to this part of the paper mill. You've got to bring these supplies to this other area. You're picking, moving these empty cars out. So there is definitely, in my view, a train focus and a car focus. On a small layout, you may have to more pick one versus the other, but on a larger layout, you can definitely do both. And that's the kind of jobs you've got. Hey, I don't like switching, so I'll do a passenger train or a hot freight train that may have reefers or something that's going to go all the way through, versus someone that wants to just go on that branch line and hit every little mine along the way and just minding their own business and not have to worry about anybody else.
So my Z scale layout that I have on my desk is basically 2 loops of track, and on the inner loop, I have 2 sidings on it that I can, maybe get 5 or 6 boxcars on each of the sidings. If I want to start doing some operations, like what do I do first?
So again, so it's 2 loops and there's no spurs. They're only sided.
There's 2 spurs on the center. Here, if I do this really quickly, I can show you. Of course, now when I'm trying to get the top off, I can't get the top off. So here it is. So there's an outer loop basically that's, this is the outer loop. There's an inner loop. I've got a crossover between the two,
Mhm.
and then on the inner loop, I've got these two sidings. Ignore this, but
Right.
here and it's Z scale. I've got some freight cars. I've got some passenger cars.
Okay, what you've got there, to just correct terminology, you've got two spurs. Okay, the fact that they're stub ended, that they go to a dead end, we typically use the term spur for those.
What's
Okay,
the difference between a spur and a siding?
the siding typically, and there may be some
Would be a,
prototype railroads who'll correct me, but I think in general, a siding will have a turnout on either end. So where one train could pass another train or meet another train. Whereas this case, you would have those, that where you have the piece of paper, that could be a building. And you would drop off those cars and they would be loaded or unloaded at that building or that loading dock, versus a siding where a train's going to pass. Now what also ends up happening is, let's see, both of those are, so if you were looking at the way you've got that set up, if
yeah,
you
I
were
know they're
going
both kind of in the same direction. They're
right,
not.
so if you were going
Yeah,
around that area clockwise, if you had the train and you're going clockwise, then in order to set up to pull or spot something from that spur, you would just back in and pick up that car. You'd pull it out, and you could leave part of the train on the right hand side. You would go in, you'd pull one or more cars out, and then you would spot some cars from your train and put those in. Now, the thing that ends up being a puzzler is, what if that train was going counterclockwise?
right.
Okay.
Yep.
So that is where at some point you're going to need something called a runaround, or
Yep.
a siding, some way to run around that train, where basically the engine comes back around to where the caboose is, and you would pull or push the cars in to go around. Now, there was something back in the day called, I think, doing a flying switch, where the car was going forward, someone would jump off, they would throw the switch before the car went in, but I think that was outlawed as something that was kind of dangerous. So on what you showed there, Heath, so do you have a way? I guess you can use the inner and the outer um,
I would
loop
have to
as
use
one of those as being a siding. So you could say the outer loop is like the main track, and the inner loop is the siding, including where those spurs are. But I guess one of the things that, when you have any of those, again, in HO, you would be having a layout on a 4x8 piece of plywood, right? That's
right.
pretty typical for HO. N scale, a small layout's going to be on a door. Let's say that's a good size. And for Z, that would probably be the same thing, or I know smaller. But at some point, with very few exceptions, you're going to need something that represents the outside world. Okay, how do cars and how do things come into that area, and where do they go afterwards? So more often than not, when someone has one or two of those loops of track, one of the first things you'd want to advise someone is to put another turnout somewhere that would represent the outside world, where
Right.
that's where
Like
things.
adding a kind of adding a turnout to nowhere that I guess we would call our staging area
Exactly,
then.
that would be
Yeah.
staging. That's the outside world. And right, you would start out and go in and do that. In some cases, if you don't have a lot of room, that could be something that's even removable. Something on a hinge, something that you could connect. You put it on a card table when you're running. So you would go ahead and do that. But dealing with the outside world is is typically a concept. Even if what you have is a branch line, at some point that branch line probably connects to a larger railroad that takes those cars away. And what it does, again, depends on how are you actually modeling something. In my area of Northern California, in my proto-freelanced railroad, there was a real railroad called the McLeod River Railroad. There was one famous HO boxcar. It was a white boxcar with the McLeod. I think their symbol was like a bear with a fish or a salmon in its mouth and with brown writing. But they were a logging railroad. And I remember that's primarily what they did in that area. And I remember, if I remember this right, the statistics were that railroad handled something like 5,500 cars a year, just not, a huge amount, 100 cars a week. That railroad typically shipped out about 5,000 cars, and inbound, it only got about 300 loads. So because it was such a remote area, most of what it was doing, and particularly like in my era, the West is the raw materials and the East is the manufactured goods. Obviously, it's not that simplistic, but you had livestock, lumber, mining, etc. in the West, and that was going to be, at least in the 40s, most of that is moving east, and the refrigerators and the automobiles and whatever else are being manufactured more so in the East and moving west. So that's why that railroad mostly ships out lumber, and then it gets petroleum products and some manufactured goods for the few residents that lived in that area.
But my mind just got sidetracked a little bit. A beginner layout, like we talked about, the Christmas tree layout is a loop. And my assumption, and maybe I'm wrong, I'm curious if other people have this experience, but most people, when they expand and make the loop bigger, like when they want to take the next step, they make the loop bigger, but they keep the loop on the outside edge of whatever their bench work is, and they put every switch and everything switching to the inside. But if you want to do operations, it seems like the key to making a layout bigger is not switches on the inside, but switches on the outside, so that things have places to go outside of your layout. Makes a much sort of, gives you a lot more opportunity when operating than if everything switches to the center of the layout.
Again, in general, I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. But yeah, I would tend to agree. You could say the inside spurs represent your town, your whatever, and the outside. There are some designs of certain layouts where essentially you can see, let's say if you had let's say with your layout as you had it shown, if you put a backdrop or a view block cutting right through the middle of it, then what it ends up being is the other side is off stage. So what ends up happening is a train will come in, and then it may spot or pull some cars, then it leaves the scene, and maybe it goes to a track that it's stored on, and then maybe another train in the other direction comes in and it works on another one of those spurs, does its work, and then it goes, off the wing, in the wings, and off it goes. And that can be a fun thing. Or the other ones is, we have a young gentleman at our club, and a super sharp guy, really gets it. He's already a better operator than many folks, 4 or 5 times older than he is now. But he's building a small shelf layout. He's just building it in his room, but it's really there for switching. There's a little bit of it that represents the in and outside world, but he's mostly modeling like packing houses and things in the Los Angeles area in the 1950s. But he has a team track, and he has livestock that comes in and other things. And you can do that in not a lot of space. He doesn't have continuous running aspects in that. So it's entirely really something for operations or to show his scenery and structure building skills on that. But he's not going to run a 20-car train in that space. That's just not practical for what he's
I wonder at what point people go from a like a loop of track type style layout or a slot car style layout to a point to point layout. Like it almost seems like there's a like you learn something or you see something and you go from just running a train to actually operating. Like it's like a
There are, I mean, there
yeah.
are, I mean, some of the layouts unfortunately, we don't run across this much out west, but in the Midwest and the eastern part of the country where there are basements,
Mhm.
that's where model railroads live, and therefore you can have a point to point layout that is long enough that if you're if Aunt Edna's coming in to visit and she wants to, oh, Bob's always down in the basement. Show Aunt Edna a train, Bob. And you get a train at one end, and maybe it takes it 8 or 10 minutes to get to the other end. And at that point, Aunt Edna's bored and she doesn't care whether it's point to
Right.
point or continuous loop, and you're done with it.
Right.
But yeah, I think that transition from that loop of track from that Christmas tree is driven by childhood experiences, personal interest, and the people you just happen to interface with.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, someone says you can have both. That's what I have on my layout. I have an upper level and a lower level reverse loop. And then there's yards that go after that. So I can run my layout as loop to loop, or point to point. Though,
Do you operate staging is generally considered, out of the layout or whatever, but do you operate your staging yards like you would a yard on your layout? Or are the
um,
staging yards you just use your hands and move stuff as you need, and then once it enters the layout, then on the yard on the layout, that's when you use
yeah,
your
you can.
switcher?
I mean, that's if you look at the evolution of my, if you look at the evolution of my layout. Initially, it was only in the 10 by 12 bedroom. So I had a yard on the lower level. I had a yard on the upper level. The layout winds its way from the lower level to the upper level. I have I I designed something that I didn't know existed. I think most people have
Mm.
heard of a helix,
Mhm.
where you go in and you have this this tightly compressed area of track where it allows you to get from one level to another. Sometimes it's hidden, sometimes it isn't. It's not maybe that prototypical, but it's just something that it models track that otherwise would have been straight. It does take up a lot of room. So, and then someone came up with something they call a nolix, not a helix. And that's what I basically have is it winds its way around the room, and that's how it gets from the lower level to the upper level. But I had 1 yard. So if we go back to my diagram here briefly. Let's see. So so initially, my layout went Bieber is the upper level yard along one wall. It wound its way through this town of Bernie, which is an upper level town. Then this represents probably the longest single track level. There's a single town on the lower level, and then it ended in Reading. And then I had staging that was physically underneath Bieber that represented Sacramento. So this was my way to get things for the outside world. So there were lumber and other industries here, and the railroad pretty much ended here. Then as time went on, I went in and put track in the closet, and that represented this staging area and also this area in Eureka. That was the closet. Then when I went into the laundry room, that ended up going into both Alturas, which is another 50 or so miles, and it provided another connection to the Great Northern and the Western Pacific. So initially, I only really interfaced with the McCloud River Railroad in Bernie. The real McCloud was up here, and then Southern Pacific in Reading, and then here in Sacramento, Western Pacific and Southern Pacific. But now I've got Northwestern Pacific here, Southern Pacific and Alturas, the Great Northern and the Western Pacific. So by a little bit of expansion, I've really turned this from what was kind of a stub-ended small logging railroad to a bridge railroad where traffic comes down from these multiple areas and pass through, because I like train running a lot. So I
Mm.
wanted to be able to do that. And over here, this is just the schematic of the railroad in terms of the various towns and whatever. And my railroad's backwards, so east is to the left, and that's really what this represents in the town. And all this, again, it's in a 10 by 12 bedroom.
And when you run a train, into the staging yard, or whatever off the thing, is there then a kind of an ops thing that happens to it before it then comes back onto the railroad? Because like if it goes off with a bunch of full boxcars, it may come back with some empty hoppers or something.
Right. So yeah, I didn't answer that part of your question. So
Oh, okay.
so that's where in general that happens in between operating sessions. So what if someone said they showed up at my house at 8 o'clock in the morning? Well, usually I'm able to negotiate a 9:45 start. That keeps domestic tranquility in my house. Some guys start earlier, guys. So someone shows up at 10 o'clock and we start running. My sessions we'll get started after a BSing and everything else. We start about 10:30, we run till about 12:30, we go to lunch, come back, an hour and 15 minutes later, we run another 2 hours, and then we're done.
Yep.
If someone said, hey, I want to stay all day, what eventually happens is all the trains that were pointed to leave staging this way eventually get to their destination, and all the staging yards have trains that have entered, and now the staging yards are stub ended, and in order to run the next session, that train needs to be turned around or a new train needs to replace it. Now that's the particulars of my layout. Now there is a concept called a mole. Okay,
Mole,
what a
like
mole
MOLE.
is active staging. The layout that
Huh.
I talked about, that I've talked about multiple times in Santa Barbara, when that layout was built, and I believe in the early 90s, a mole was really the rage. That was the way a lot of layouts were designed. And someone had that job where when it basically all these staging areas typically were co-located so that one person could take some cars off of here and then they could move it over here to represent something coming back, and they could go in and move that. In this particular layout, it really almost takes two guys full time, because an operating session on that layout is going to have 18 people, maybe something like that, and that session runs continuously. But to answer your other part of your question, on my layout, I actively restage these transfers that come in from the Great Northern and the Western Pacific. These come in, and this happens to be in that laundry room area where I've got access to them. And it's only a 5-car transfer. So when it goes onto one
Okay.
track, when
Yep.
I have time, I move that one out, and I've got another 5-car train that I have pre-staged, and I pick it up and put it on the track. So that's an active staging area. I mean, in general, you don't want to be moving cars through the layout room, during a session. That's a bit of a faux pas, at least in most of the circles I've gone in. You don't want to be,
You don't
they
want to
use
touch
the
the
term,
cars, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
5-finger crane, yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Thomas from Split Rock 323 is saying, how do you get people to operate after lunch? I find no one wants to stand that long as well either.
Okay, well, and that's a good question. So, I typically get 2 comments about my layout, and they are related. Usually it's, wow, you were able to get a lot of layout in this space, and ooh, your aisles are kind of narrow. And well, that's kind of why I was able to do that. So part
Yeah.
of it for me, the reason that I don't run a 4-hour session straight through is it, I don't know, claustrophobic, maybe a bit much, but it's tight. And I think after a couple hours to get in the car, drive somewhere, have a burger and a beer and whatever else, and then shoot the breeze, that's the session that works for me. But it's so much about your crew. I go to a layout in Fullerton, in Orange County. We start at 8 in the morning. We're done. We get there at 8. We start at 8:30. We're done by 12:30, and then we go to lunch afterwards. There's some layouts where you go straight through, take a break in the middle. Some layouts you'll get together and gather. There's, one of the things we haven't talked about is before an operating session, there's something called a crew briefing. And the layout owner will go over, and again, if it's for his local crew that are always there, he may talk about the particulars of today. All right, hey, this is early December, where our mail trains are extra long because we got a lot of packages we're delivering. Or hey, it's August, it's harvest season, we're going to have extra trains that are doing such and such. Or if it's a bunch of newbies, a lot of that is the main, hey, here's how this layout works. This is what we do. Unfortunately, most of us, present company included, forget the term briefing has the word brief in it. And sometimes you go on, and in the beginning when you say, okay, the most important thing is this, okay, a half hour or 45 minutes into the briefing, they have forgotten those most important things. And this minutia that you're getting to at 45 minutes that only matters to one person, they've completely forgotten all of that. So that's where we, that's where that's the downside of being too long-winded.
Right. Remember this. I'm going to run a short little video just to thank people and talk about something real quick. But when we come back, what I want to get into is how do you set up for an operating session?
Okay, and I've got a slide or two from my presentation that might be a little, at least the way I do it. And again, this has evolved over the time. So yeah, when we come back, we can start with that.
And David Atkins, just to answer your question, yeah, I'm trying to do a kind of a model railroader weight loss challenge contest thing. I just thought, having kind of accountability people within our community, I thought would be kind of a good thing. So if you're interested in doing kind of a weight loss thing, I don't know quite what it's going to look like yet, but I thought if we get a couple people together, we can kind of, root each other on, and we'll figure some prize or some, railroad related thing. Along those lines, I do want to thank all the people that support this channel, both individually as well as my channel sponsors. I don't know why that did that, but anyway, Al, when you're back to sharing, why don't we take a look at, because hosting an operating session seems like, I wouldn't say a monumental task, but it seems like there is actually a lot of prep work. It's not like if I want to run a train, I just go grab a train, put it on my layout, and turn it on. But if I'm running an op session where other people are going to come, join, then you need to prepare for them, not just with food, but actually with the with the layout as well.
So I thought I was going to share just a few pictures of my layout. Is that sharing right now?
I don't see it yet.
Okay.
I don't see you sharing anything right now. So
share. No, share. I have to pick which one.
Yeah, Container Man wants free beer and pretzels.
How about now?
Yep, I got you now.
All right. So what I wanted to do. Showing my Mac lack of skills here. Okay, here we go. How about this? Is that
Hold on one second. We seem to have something stuck. Give me one. Let's see if this fixes it. No, let's try. Let's try. I don't know what to try. Let's try this. Let's see. Hmm. Let me try this.
all right?
We
I'm
seem
gonna
to
stop.
we seem to be stuck on a it's stuck on a video screen. Uh-oh. This was just about to get interesting. Let's see. And
Okay,
stop it.
I'm back. Yeah, we can. We
Oh, there
don't.
we go. We're back. If you want to share your slide again, it looks like we're back.
Let me see here. What?
Sorry, little
Well, I
little
tell you what. I
technical
was.
difficulties there.
Yeah. So I was going to try to see about sharing some layout here. Well, let's I guess let's stay on topic here. So let's see. Am I?
We don't stay on topic very well around here, so it's all good. But
That's okay. All right. Let's see. So let's go. All right. Let's see what that says there. How's that sharing?
yes, it is.
All right. Let me. Okay. So again, this layout's for operations. It's not a whole lot to look at. This is my Reading. So this is my Bernie Reading and Western. Again, a 10 by 12 bedroom. This direction here is the 12 direction. The 10 feet is across this angle here. I assume you're seeing my cursor.
I am. Yes, we can see your
Yeah,
cursor.
so this is this Reading yard on the right-hand side. This is the main yard. You're only seeing a little bit of it. This tunnel portal here goes to Sacramento. There's a freight house on this lower level. This is a train that looks like it just arrived coming into Reading Yard. This is Bernie in the upper level.
When you say
This,
so real quick, when you say that tunnel portal goes to Sacramento, does that train go off into staging then?
right, exactly. This
Okay.
is so from here it goes 150 miles, 160 miles to Sacramento, and the staging is on the other side of the room. There, the closet that I mentioned. So a train coming from Sacramento can go through Reading here and then disappear off to the lower right. So there's really 3 tunnel portals in the Reading area. One here goes to Sacramento. This one where the caboose is just coming out of goes through the layout, the modeled area of the layout going up to Bieber and Sacramento and Alturas. And then the main line, which you can't see over here, disappears into Eureka.
How
This
wide
is
was that aisle? Sorry, before you get off
this
that picture.
minimum pinch point here is about 20, 21 inches. So some of the larger model railroads have a little trouble with this, and that is something. If I had to
Yeah.
do it, if I could make this room, which I've talked about, 4 feet bigger in this direction, it would entirely go to aisle space, because I really can't have someone work this yard and work this industry up here at the same time, unless they are very dimensionally diminutive. So,
Right.
and
Yeah.
just
And you're not getting a chair or a stool in there either for somebody that.
actually, there is a little stool,
Oh, is
folded
it?
stool over here, but and then is for folks just to get, you're not going to see it here, but going through this crossover, this is the lower reverse loop, and this is what I'm
Okay.
using as a staging area, because that's where that train loops. So this is that same aisle looking back the other way. This is where the caboose was coming out of. So this goes up to the main part of the layout, and then this goes into Bieber. This then is now, this is Reading Yard. I just realized it now. I probably should have changed the order in these pictures. So previously we were here looking this way. This is Reading Yard. This tunnel portal here goes into Eureka. So before I did this, that was the main extent of the room here. And then there's also another staging area up there. And then this is Beaver Yard. Now we're in the other aisle. Sacramento is underneath over here. And, again, it's not quite the Great Plywood Plains, but not very much in terms of scenery. And here, what you see here, this is operations paperwork on the wall. This is telling the Beaver Yardmaster what he has to do for that session. And then the Reading Yardmaster's paperwork is up here. The timetable is up along the wall. There's a diagram of Reading Yard here. So again, I'm very much into paperwork. Here's all the car cards. Each one of these represent one of the tracks for the yard. This is the train brief. Here's
So
the
you
water.
use all car cards. You don't use any switch lists or any of that.
I don't use computer generated switch list. I mean, a road crew could create their own switch list. A part of it is what did you learn when you started out? And at Gary Siegel's layout, we did car cards. At the club, we modeled that. In other areas, people do that. And if it's a well-designed system and it works well, both of them can be a lot of fun. There are pluses and minuses to each of them. And depending on how important those pluses and minuses are, will drive you to one system versus the other. I don't know that one's better than the other. Again, some people feel pretty strongly one is better than the other, but So
Split Rock is asking, do you find it tough having operations stations stacked above each other?
So short answer is yes. And what I have kitted on my layout is because there's 4 people typically. I'm in the laundry room dispatching out of the room. I've got one yardmaster on the lower level, another yardmaster on the upper level, a full-time road crew that's running the trains. And then there are times when I'll put on the road crew hat and I'll be a second road crew. I like dispatching. I'm part of that lunatic fringe. And if there was a layout that didn't need a dispatcher, this is it. But I find it keeps me in practice for when I operate on the bigger layouts. I really need more of an aisle dispatcher than I need a train dispatcher,
right,
based on where things are. So the short answer is, going back to the picture, yeah, when someone's working those industries, I almost need to give the yard guy a break, because depending on the dimensions of the 2 individuals, it might only be one person can be in there at a time.
Can you, so Tina from Mojave Model Railroad's asking, what kind of information goes onto the car cards?
Okay, let me see if I included any of those in here. So in general, what you're going to have is what type of car is it, and the American Association of Railroads, the AAR. Again, they were back in the, they were in play in the 40s. I don't know if the same organization is still in play today, but they had a certain code for cars, and some of them were pretty obvious. FL was a flat car, but TK, and there's various things for tank cars. A box car is XM, X for box car. So that's part of it. Another thing would be what town or city and state is it going to? So there's a destination or a to, and then there's who is the consignee? Who's the person that's receiving that? Is it the Sears Roebuck, is Sears getting this? Is it a power plant getting coal? And then some of them will include where it came from and maybe who the shipper was, and then the contents. Some people just have on it east, west, north, south. Okay, the easts go this way, and they don't want any of the other details. That just really depends on what people in the hobby show. But
for those that don't know, there are, I know, or at least I'm pretty sure, the OPSIG actually provides a the OPSIG actually provides a template, I think, that you can download of car cards, so you can just print that stuff out as well.
Right. So if we want to look at this, so this is my screen coming through?
Yep.
Share. Okay. So this is a lot of detail. Most people probably don't include this amount of stuff. So the first thing I want to say is anybody's new to operation, don't be scared by this. You do not have to do anything like this. I actually enjoy the paperwork and whatever else. But what this represents, each one of these blocks is one of my 4 operating sessions. Like I said, some layouts, they run the same session every time. Some layouts run kind of the midnight to noon and the noon to midnight. I happen to run 4 different time blocks. I run a night, and on the railroad, a session or a work thing is called a trick. So the night trick, the morning trick, the afternoon trick, and the evening trick. Those are
And
the
you just
4.
make these up just sort of randomly, or is there some?
I figured I wanted to have a unique name for each one. So obviously morning and afternoon is, so I just wanted to have a name. You see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 after it parenthetically. But you look at the time on the railroad, this train leaves at 1:35 a.m. So this session has trains that go from 1:35 a.m. to 6 a.m. The next session picks up from 7:30 a.m. to noon. The next one is 1:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. And then this one runs from 7:30 p.m. to midnight. Now the main, and these are the directions, east or west, the times. Again, there's a lot of detail in here that, for the new folks, I don't want to scare anybody. But what you mentioned about staging, for me, managing staging is a big deal. So each row is a 30-minute block of time. So I schedule the trains about every 30 minutes on the railroad. And what this represents is, for me, EK is Eureka. Remember, that's Eureka is EK. SA is Sacramento. Oops. So Sacramento is down there. AT is Alturas. So these are the 3 main corners of the railroad where things are coming out of staging, and this other one. So this train leaves Eureka Track 2 is where this comes into Eureka Track 2. This train is out of Track 2 in Sacramento and goes into Eureka Track 2. This train leaves Alturas Track 1, goes into Eureka Track 3. In developing this schedule and this, where I had open space in these various staging tracks was key, and that's what I'm kind of managing here. Is if you look down here, here's this train comes out of Track 2 in Eureka, and it better get out on time because a half hour later, there's another train that's going to fill into that track.
How many train like if it's I guess, what are the consists that you run, and then how many cars, like if you have one steam locomotive, how many cars is kind of behind that?
So on this layout, I've got a 3.5% grade as we go around
okay.
the layout. So a consolidation, a 280, kind of a general purpose steam engine, can pull about 8 40-foot cars on this layout. So if I have a train longer than 8 cars, then I either have to double head it, I have to put 2 steam engines on that train, or what we have to do is run a bigger locomotive, like a 482, a Mountain, a Mikado, and that's part of what we figure out. That's actually, again, this, I could spend the whole time just talking about this, and it takes a long time for folks to get used to this. But essentially, what happens here is this train leaves Eureka, which with engine 53, which is a consolidation. When it gets to Reading, the yard master changes to engine 80, which is a bigger engine, which is a Mountain, which is big enough to haul this train all the way up the grade. So that's part of these nuances that I add to try to make the operating session run longer and be more interesting. This Yardmaster deals with engine swaps on some of these trains. And, those are listed as they go through here. The bold
So
are,
this is definitely getting pretty advanced as
yeah,
far
it is.
as
And I don't
the,
want to scare anybody with it.
yeah.
But you asked
Can
about
you
the
actually,
staging. Managing staging is a big thing because I've basically expanded these number of trains are driven by how much staging tracks I've got.
and so you will set all this up prior to the night before or whatever, before anybody,
Yeah.
comes over.
Most sane people would get it set up about a week before, but you must know me because yes, I am still setting up the night before, which is frustrating to me because I leave that stuff till the last minute. But
Do you have a car card and a waybill with you in that room, or are they that you can hold up? Just because it's a little hard to see some of that, so I was wondering if you could hold one of them up, or are they
I
all in the
will,
other room?
I can, yeah, if you want me to step out here, and I don't have it in where I'm at right now,
No,
but
it's okay. Someone was just
okay.
asking.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the only way I could go in and do this would be, let me see if this will work. Oops. No, I don't want to do
Do
that.
you base the operations
Hmm.
that lists the 4 sessions and stuff knowing how many people are coming over, or do you kind of create? Because I mean, we all have lives. People
Right.
drop out, people can show up, whatever. Like, how do you? Is there like a guaranteed number of operators, and then if you get more people, you just don't?
That's another interesting point. So one of my good friends who um, taught me a whole lot about model railroading and everything else. He was a regular at Gary Siegel's layout in Santa Barbara. Decided to build his own, and Gary's has about 18-ish people at a session. And this gentleman built his own layout. And then he hosted an op session for the first time and dealing with people inviting and whatever else. And his comment to me years later was, I knew in building a layout, I was going to need carpentry skills, electrical skills. I was going to have to do some programming with DCC. I might need some scenery skills. He said, what I didn't realize is I really needed a degree in psychology and sociology to deal with some of the personalities. And that's not meant to scare people, but it is. I have 3 guests typically. During the pandemic, my son still lives with us. He's sort of he's into trains. So I would have a good friend that I knew was being careful, and I operated like 3 times during the pandemic with
Okay.
only 3 people. We chose to take that risk, and it worked. It worked out because we were getting a little stir crazy. But I can run this with 2 or 3. If it's 3, I'm doing everything. Usually, I'm doing everything, and the 2 guests are doing the yard. But yeah, in my session, if 2 people cancel, I'm done. If you've got 18 people
Right.
and 2 people cancel, you can fill in. But that ends up potentially being a big. But life happens.
Yeah,
Hey, I
yeah.
had to take my dog to the vet or whatever. I'm sorry, I got to cancel on you. But then you just try to adapt like the real railroad does. The bridge washed out. What do? Well, we figure something out.
Yeah, Mojave Model Railroad says you just hit it on the head. Personalities. I so agree. That's what turned me off from ever doing another operating session.
Well, and hopefully that's not the case. I mean, there are, it's like anything else. You're in line with someone at the grocery store, and sometimes someone will let you get in front, and oh, go ahead. It looks like you're in a hurry, and then someone else is going to be a jerk. You don't stop going to the grocery store. I mean, you chalk it up as we're going to go in and do that. Now, if it happens regularly,
Right.
there may be a little each area, what I like to say is with model railroading, each area kind of has a dialect. There's usually one person that got into it in that area. And whether it's because they've been in it longer, they're more knowledgeable, they've got a stronger personality, it kind of reflects that area. and that may not line up with you want to do. They may be super relaxed, and maybe you're a go-getter, or conversely, they're just sitting there sweating, cursing at each other, and you're like, hey, this is supposed to be fun. So you have to find the right group, I think,
Yeah.
that that matches your personality. But the reality of it, what I look at it is, what I found is building this railroad and hosting op sessions was a means to meet and have good times with friends. If you have the attitude that this is about being with people and enjoying, birds of a feather, if you want, and, it's not about, being perfect in terms of how you did that. You could say, I know when I first started at work and there was a softball league, the softball league's purpose was to have beer and pizza afterwards. It was an excuse to have beer. It wasn't about the softball or about any of that. And I think operations is an issue. But yeah, dealing with the personalities. Maybe I've mellowed a little bit as I'm older. But yeah, I mean, there's people have gotten in arguments. People have lost friends over things like that, and that's unfortunate. But
I'm gonna push. Just so you know, we got about 15 minutes left. People are asking about the way bills and stuff, and I think this is, again, they're a little small, but this was kind of an example of
yeah,
your
let me
car
let me
cards
try
and
to make
stuff.
these a little. Can I make these a little bigger? Are they a little bit more?
They're a little bit bigger now, but yeah. And actually, Tina's actually has a great question here. Do you recommend any books on operations? Like, is there any?
So the National the Model Railroad Association, the OPSIG, has something called the Compendium, and I think it's still, I don't think it's out of print, but it's a really uh, many experienced model railroaders and authors, much more experienced, much more knowledgeable than me, got together, and there's about, I think, about a dozen sections, and they talk about electronics, they talk about structure, they talk about all these things in there. And I think it's the operations compendium. I should know that off
Um,
the top of my
Give
head.
me
But
1 second, and I can actually screen share it if I could do this without crashing anything. So this looks like it here.
yep.
Dispatcher to OPSIG, ready to roll. A compendium of model railroad operations from design to implementation. Well, so here's interesting. So I think it's like $7 for the year for the OPSIG. So it's $50 for non-members, $40 for members. So you might as well become a member and then pay the $40 for the book. Um,
There's been lots of the other place you can look, Model Railroader magazine.
yeah.
There actually are still magazines that are published, is a good monthly periodical, and there is a column on operations each month. uh, they also have the Calmbach, Calmbach is the publisher. They have a whole host of really good small paperback books. They're typically, I think, about $20. You can see them at most hobby shops, or you can order them online. I think some of them are on Amazon. There is Introduction to Operations. There's a lot of the in the weeds. There's things just about the coal industry, or just about the petroleum industry, or passenger trains, or yards, or whatever. There's two or three of them that are more general in nature, that are about operations. There you go. That's
This
that
Tony
Tony
Custer's book.
Tony Custer's is another. If you don't want to spend 40 and you want to spend, I don't know what Tony's is, about 20.
Well, on
It
Amazon,
must
this
be out
one's
of
showing
print, I
$100,
guess.
but you
So
can. But yeah, I got to meet Tony through the NMRA as well. I actually got to record his presentation, and people were joking that Tony Custer is the East Coast version of Jack Burgess. Just sort of that level of
detail.
model, yeah, detail and model railroading, and yeah,
Yeah.
Tony.
Those would be the Kalmba books. And then if you want it kind of all in one place, the compendium. Those would be do good sources. And then there's lots of online, Yahoo groups have pretty much gone away, but Groups.io and
Groups.io.
lots of different things. And the OPSIG itself has a Groups.io as well.
Oh, I don't know that I'm a member of that one. But yeah, here's the Kalmbach media page, and is this it in Wisconsin, or is this
Yeah,
not
they're
it?
in Wisconsin.
No, so this must be them brands. Let's see. Astronomy, classic trains, classic toy trains, fine scale modeler, model railroader, trains, model railroad video plus. So yeah, Kalmbach's got
Yeah.
a lot of stuff as well.
Is if you want to go back to looking at the waybill, is I've expanded this about as big as it can get. Is that still not really visible? Looks like from looking
I
at
can
my
kind of see it on my screen. Some people are on their phones though, so that gets
okay.
a little
Yeah.
hard. But yeah,
Okay, well, yeah, that's something. Well, you'll have to just watch the clinic on Thursday. We'll go
yeah,
look at
there you go.
more detail.
Why don't we get into that a little bit? So we met through this this NMRA thing. What's trying to find it now? What's your clinic about? When is it? And if you just want to talk a little bit about that stuff.
Sure. So this is the title page from my clinic, and I've briefed this before, and I have some selected slides that are shown here. So it's maximizing small layout operations, squeezing 10 pounds of ops into a 5-pound layout. So the clinic talks about many of the subjects that we touched on. I listed July 6th on here. By the time I sent this in, they recorded this. We weren't sure what day I was going to be on. It's actually July 8th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, I believe. This Thursday is when
Thursday. Yep.
my clinic is on. It's actually been pre-recorded, runs about 40 minutes, and then I believe I'll be on to answer questions afterwards for 15 or 20 minutes, and then they're going to have breakout rooms. I think that's the way most of the NMRA convention clinics are going to be set up. So if there's any specific questions about this, but really it's the first slide was that I showed was about the operating sessions pace, but it's a bit of a tutorial about what I did on my layout, some considerations, some things that we touched on here regarding what is your view about time? Do you want something with a schedule that's got time pressure on it, where you're going to go into this pace? What are you going to model? You're going to model a city. What are the pros and cons there? And then I use, when we went through some of the slides here, kind of a case study of my railroad in terms of what I ended up doing. But a lot of things to consider. My goal, and sometimes maybe the subject matter is too broad. Hopefully there is enough general information up front for a beginner, either someone thinking about going into operations, someone with a layout that they haven't operated, or someone thinking about designing a layout and weren't thinking about operations, but what might be some of the factors they would think about. And again, we've touched on some things here. Aisle space. If you're the only one in the room, if it's in your basement and no one else is going to be down there, make sure you fit through the aisles. That's probably all that matters. But if you have a large enough space and you're going to have multiple people there, I mean, you almost need people sidings in the aisles. You need some areas that get wide enough where people can pass by each other. The length of the session can be important, and what is it that you, other than, like I said, the most important advice is having fun. Well, someone may ask then the question, okay, how do I have fun? And other than making new friends, the camaraderie of being together with folks, typically sharing some kind of a meal or a snack with someone, potentially being invited to their layout. What are you trying to, what is it that you're trying to model? Are you building on what you do at work, let's say, if you happen to be still employed, or if you're retired, do you want to build on what you like to do? Or do you want it to be a break from what you do? I do a technical, challenging job at work. I'm still, still working full time. I personally don't want to deal with a lot of the computer aspects of things. Some people really like, there's great signaling systems. There's all kinds of uh, technology. And even though I'm in the technology field, for me, I want to break from that. I want to go back to the 40s when life was a little simpler. I want to lay out with ground throws. I don't want to be programming turnouts and whatever. I've got a friend who has a a craft, a trade job. He's working with his hands all day. He likes getting on the computer because it's different than what he does during the day. So part of that's your personality. You want to build on what you do at work. You want to do something different than what you do or did at work.
Well, Al, I can't thank you enough for coming. Really appreciate the information you shared. And, I think this is just great because someone was asking earlier, you don't have a YouTube channel as far as I understand, but if people want to get in touch with you, SoCalOps.com, I guess would be the SoCalOps.com.
Yeah,
is your,
I host a every other year event that is yes, some of the layouts I mentioned are on that list. It's www.socalops.com, and I think I've got my email address, or it might be a Gmail email address on there. That's specifically to that event. But yeah, if you wanted to contact me, or I'm fine if you want to contact Heath, and if he wants to pass something along to me on
Awesome.
that. But definitely enjoyed talking with you, and hopefully folks found it useful. A little bit of a one man's perspective. We kind of bopped around through a lot of different topics, which is what he said we would do. We had some prepared material, but hopefully we were responding to the questions as it came about. And what they say, model railroading is fun. If you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong.
Exactly. It's been fantastic. Thank you so much. Just to remind people, I'm not going to be streaming Friday, my usual 11:30 to 1 kind of lunchtime stream. So if people want to, if someone wants to jump in and stream, send me an email and I will shout that out so that we, have someone to hang out with. And, thanks everyone for being here. Al, thank you again. I will be at the NMRA hosting the YouTube Model Railroader breakout room on lunch on Tuesday and Thursday. So if you are there, please come say hello, and have a really great rest of the week.
Yeah, thank you for all the kind words I'm seeing on the chat here. Thank you, everybody.
It's all about humanity. About It's all about humanity. It's all about